I'm not the kind of guy who usually remembers his clients. You'd be surprised how much sameness there is in busted garbage disposals, leaky faucets, and stuck closet doors. Most people don't look up from their phones when I walk in, just point me toward the problem and disappear. But the guy at apartment 3D? I remember him. His name was Daniel. Mid-30s maybe. Sharp jaw, thick dark hair, and that effortless kind of style that made him look like he stepped out of a coffee commercial. I only knew his name because it was on the ticket that came through the app I freelance with. Client reported, sliding balcony door stuck. Routine job. I almost declined it. I was tired. It was getting late, and I hadn't eaten anything besides a gas station burrito all day. But something about the timing felt right. So I clicked accept. I buzzed his unit and waited in the hallway. 3 seconds later, the door opened, and there he was. He had a dish towel slung over his shoulder and a glass of wine in his hand. "You must be Adam," he said. I blinked. "Yeah, that's me, door guy." He smiled at that. "Come on in." The condo was nicer than I expected. Minimal, warm lighting, records playing on an actual turntable in the corner. There was a faint smell of roasted garlic in the air, like dinner had just wrapped up. I followed him past the kitchen and into the living room, where the sliding door to the balcony sat stubbornly shut. "It's been sticking for a few days now," Daniel said, setting his wine glass on the side table, "and I guess today it finally gave up completely." "Let's take a look." He stepped aside, arms folded. I crouched down, inspecting the track. Years of dirt buildup, plus a bent bottom rail. Classic wear and tear for a building this age. "This might take a few minutes," I said. "No rush," he replied, and leaned against the wall like he had all the time in the world. I could feel his eyes on me while I worked. Not in a weird way, more like he was studying me. Curious, I was used to clients hovering, but this felt different. Less impatient. More interested? "You're not what I expected," he said suddenly. I looked up, screwdriver still in hand. "Oh? You've got the whole rugged handyman thing going," he said. "Thought I'd get some kid in khakis with a tool belt from Target." I laughed. "Yeah, nah, I've got the grease under my nails to prove it." He smiled at that, and for a second, neither of us said anything. The record flipped sides with a soft clunk in the corner. "You live around here?" he asked. "About 15 minutes east. Rent's cheaper if you don't mind traffic." He nodded like he knew the trade-off. "I just moved here last year. Still figuring it out." The door finally gave with a groan, sliding open after a few solid adjustments. I tested it, made sure it glided clean, then wiped my hands on my rag and stood. "Good as new," I said. Daniel stepped forward, tested it himself. "Wow. You really fixed it." "That's the gig." He turned to me, his expression soft. "You hungry?" I blinked. "What?" "I made too much pasta, wasn't expecting company, but you've got perfect timing. And it feels weird to let you go back out there without at least feeding you." I hesitated. "You can say no," he added quickly. "No pressure." But I didn't want to say no. Something about the warmth in his voice. The way he leaned slightly toward me like he wanted me to stay. Not just as a thank you, but because he wanted the company. So I said, "Yeah, sure, I could eat." I followed him back into the kitchen, where a big ceramic bowl sat on the stove, still steaming. He grabbed a second plate from the cabinet without asking if I wanted to sit. He just set it down on the island like it was already decided. "You like spicy?" he asked, ladling pasta onto the plate. "I live for it," I said, and it wasn't even a lie. That made him grin. "Good." I went a little heavy on the chili flakes. He poured me a glass of red from the same bottle he'd been drinking, and we sat across from each other, forks twirling through thick noodles, the scent of garlic and tomato filling the space between us. The food was damn good. better than I expected from a guy who answered the door in jeans and no socks. "So what's your deal?" he asked, halfway through his plate. "Always wanted to be a handyman," I laughed. "What, you think that's something little kids dream about?" "I don't know. I just like hearing how people end up where they are." I leaned back, sipped my wine. It started as a side hustle. I was working construction, but it wasn't steady. This app thing came up, and I realized I could make decent money fixing stuff. I like using my hands, so it stuck. He nodded thoughtfully. "There's something hot about that." I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "Fixing things. Knowing how to handle tools. Doing stuff with your hands." He didn't say it like a joke. His eyes didn't flinch away either, and suddenly the air between us shifted. I tried to play it cool, but my heart was already beating a little faster. Not sure if I should take that as a compliment or a proposition. He grinned. "Maybe both." I looked down at my plate, trying to hide the smile tugging at my lips. I wasn't sure if he was serious, but I wasn't sure I wanted him to stop either. We ate in silence for a bit. The kind of silence that's thick, aware, like the room knows what's going on before either of you admit it. He poured us each a little more wine and leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You know what I realized?" "What?" "I've never had dinner with someone who fixed something for me. First time for everything." "Exactly," he said, voice quieter now. "And I don't know. It's kind of intimate, in a weird way." I felt that. Not just in the words, but in the way he said them. In the way he was looking at me now, his eyes softer, like he was trying to figure something out about me, or maybe about himself. "You're not what I expected either," I said. He tilted his head. "How so?" "You're not just some guy in a nice condo." "What am I then?" "I haven't figured that out yet." He smirked. "You want to?" I nodded before I could stop myself. "Yeah, I do." There was a long pause. Then he stood, picked up our plates, and set them in the sink. I thought maybe that was the end of it. But then he turned, leaned back against the counter, and said, "You want to see the balcony." I knew what he meant. And I didn't. "Sure," I said, standing. We stepped outside. The city stretched below, lights blinking against the evening sky. He moved beside me, arms resting on the railing, his shoulder brushing mine. "I like it out here," he said. "Feels quieter than it is." I nodded. "Nice view." He turned to look at me. "Not the view. Me." "You can kiss me if you want," he said. I blinked. "You serious?" I wouldn't have said it if I wasn't. I didn't answer. Just leaned in, slow, deliberate, until our lips met. His lips were soft, warm, slower than I expected. I wasn't sure what I thought kissing Daniel would be like, if I even thought it would happen at all. But it definitely wasn't this calm, steady pull. No nerves, no awkward angles, just connection. And God, it hit me harder than I thought it would. He tasted like red wine and heat, and I could feel the slight tremble in his fingers as his hand brushed the side of my jaw. It wasn't a move, exactly. It felt more like instinct, like he was checking if this was real. It was. When we finally broke apart, neither of us moved right away. His forehead rested lightly against mine, breath warm on my cheek. "That was," he started. "Yeah," I said, finishing for him. Daniel exhaled, a soft laugh escaping. "I wasn't expecting to do that tonight." "Me neither. I was expecting a broken door, and maybe a tip if I was lucky." He smiled, eyes still searching mine. "Do you always kiss your clients after fixing their stuff?" I leaned back, just enough to see him clearly. "First time." "Well," he murmured, "first can be good." We stood there for a while on the balcony, the city humming below us, a quiet hum of traffic and wind weaving through the moment. My arm brushed against his as we leaned side by side, both of us unsure of what to say next. Eventually, he turned to me and asked, "Do you want to stay a bit longer?" I hesitated. It wasn't that I didn't want to. I did, badly. But part of me was cautious. This was his home, his space, his vulnerability on display. I wasn't sure if I was walking into something casual or something that would stick with me for longer than tonight. "You sure?" I asked. "You barely know me." He looked at me, the kind of look that makes your stomach twist in a good way. "I know enough." I followed him back inside. The record had stopped playing, and the needle ticked softly against the end groove. Daniel walked over and flipped it, dropping the arm back into place like it was the most natural thing in the world. And then he looked back at me, hands in his pockets, bare feet padding softly over the wood floors, and said, "You want another drink?" I probably shouldn't. "I'm driving." "Then just stay." There it was again, the pause, the uncertainty mixed with something almost tender. I knew that tone, even if I hadn't heard it from a guy like him before. It wasn't a command, it was a hope. So I stayed. We didn't rush. There was no tearing off clothes or frantic kissing against walls. It was slower, more about proximity than urgency. We sat back down on the couch, talked about nothing for a bit. Favorite movies, weird clients, how he ended up in this condo after his last relationship fell apart. The kind of stuff people usually don't get to until date 3. Then, somewhere in the middle of a story about a neighbor who tried to hit on him by leaving him a single tomato on his doorstep, he leaned over and kissed me again. This time longer, deeper, like we both knew what it meant now. His hand rested against my chest, not pushing, just feeling. His thumb brushed just over my collarbone, and mine found the curve of his waist, where the fabric of his shirt had ridden up slightly. We weren't rushing, but we were definitely going somewhere. We didn't go to his bedroom. Not right away. Instead, we lingered on the couch, limbs stretched out and overlapping, like two people who hadn't fully decided what this was yet, but didn't want to stop whatever was happening. Daniel had shifted closer after that second kiss, his body angled toward mine, one knee drawn up between us. His hand found its way under the hem of my shirt, resting lightly against the skin just above my belt. His fingers were warm, slow, not searching for anything specific, just there, like he needed to feel that I was real. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm thinking," I replied. "About?" "This. You. How weirdly natural this feels." He smiled, eyes still half-lidded from the last kiss. "Weirdly?" I shrugged. "You barely know me. I fixed a door, and now we're tangled up on your couch like it's the most normal thing in the world." Daniel traced his thumb in a small arc against my side. "Yeah, but doesn't it feel good?" "Too good," I said before I could stop myself. He chuckled softly, but then his expression shifted, eyes locking onto mine in a way that felt different, slightly more serious, like we were towing the edge of something bigger. "I've been alone for a while," he said. "Not lonely, just alone. By choice," I nodded. "I get that. I didn't expect anything to happen tonight. Not even the wine, honestly. He paused. "You walked in, and it was like the air changed. You ever feel that? With someone?" I stared at him for a long beat. "Yeah, just now." He leaned in again, slower this time, and kissed me in a way that felt more like a conversation than a spark. No rush, no heat, just quiet affirmation. Like he wanted me to know he meant it. My hands slid around to his lower back, pulling him a little closer. I felt the shape of him, the way his body folded into mine without hesitation, the warmth of his skin under his t-shirt, the shift in his breathing as his hand moved from my side to the back of my neck. I could have pulled him into my lap, could have taken it further right then, but instead I whispered, "You don't do this often, do you?" He pulled back slightly. "Is that obvious?" "A little." He nodded, lips pressing together like he didn't want to admit it out loud. "I don't usually feel this safe with someone, let alone someone I just met." I leaned in, brushed my nose against his. "Me neither." We sat like that for a while, breathing in sync, the soft hum of the record player still spinning in the background, even though the side had ended again. City lights flickering against the windows, casting quiet shadows on the floor. Eventually, he stood and offered his hand to me. "Come with me," he said, voice low. I didn't ask where. I already knew. Daniel led me down a narrow hallway, the only light coming from a small lamp in the corner of the living room behind us. His hand stayed in mine, his fingers lightly curled around my own, and I couldn't help but notice the calm in his grip. Steady, not rushed. Like this was something he wasn't afraid of anymore. His bedroom was simple. Clean lines. A low, soft bed that looked like it was never made in a hurry. There were no clothes on the floor, no clutter, just a book on the nightstand and a pair of glasses folded neatly beside it. "I'm a little neurotic," he said, catching me glancing around. "I like it," I replied. "Feels lived in, but not messy," he smiled. "That's kind of the goal." He sat on the edge of the bed, pulling me closer between his knees. His hands settled at my hips, thumbs slipping just under the waistband of my jeans. He didn't tug, didn't push, just looked up at me like he was checking one last time. "You good?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, my voice lower than I expected. I leaned down and kissed him again, slower now. Everything about this was slow. Careful. Not careful like nervous, but like something worth not screwing up. I felt his breath hitch when I slid my hands into his hair, tilting his head back just slightly. He pulled me closer by the waist, and I followed, letting him lie back onto the mattress as I braced myself over him. It was the kind of kiss that deepened by accident, the kind where your body responds before your brain can catch up. His fingers pressed into my back, drawing lines up the muscles under my shirt like he wanted to memorize them. And when I kissed just below his jaw, I felt him sigh, that small, involuntary sound people only make when they're finally letting go of whatever they were holding on to. I didn't want to rush anything, but I couldn't help wanting more. Wanting to feel more of him. To understand whatever this thing was between us that had started with a sliding door and turned into something that now felt bigger than the room we were in. We kept kissing, touching, talking in between breaths. The kind of talking that barely makes sense, but means everything in the moment. "I didn't expect this," he said, voice muffled into my shoulder. "I didn't either," I replied, "but I'm not complaining." "Good," he murmured, "because you're kind of messing with my head." I paused, looked at him. "That a bad thing?" He met my eyes and smiled. "Not yet." He pulled my shirt off over my head, slow, deliberate, letting his hands explore my chest afterward like he'd been curious since I walked through the door. My skin buzzed under his touch, not just because of how he touched me, but how he looked at me while he did. I wasn't just some guy who showed up with a wrench. And he wasn't just some guy with a door problem. Whatever this was, it had already become something else entirely. It was well past midnight when we finally slowed down. Daniel lay beside me, one arm draped across my chest, our legs tangled under the sheet. The room was quiet, save for the distant sounds of the city, cars humming a few blocks away, the occasional echo of laughter from someone walking home late. I stared at the ceiling for a while, unsure if I was supposed to leave or if I even wanted to. My clothes were still folded in a pile on the chair across the room. My toolbox sat quietly by the bedroom door, a reminder that I hadn't come here for this, but I hadn't fought it either. Daniel shifted, his hand moving slowly across my stomach, fingers tracing lazy, thoughtless shapes against my skin. He looked content, but awake. "You ever just not want the night to end?" he said. I turned my head toward him. "Yeah, sometimes." He nodded, like he was thinking hard about something. "I know this probably doesn't mean anything to you, like I'm just another call on your schedule, but hey," I cut in, resting a hand over his. "Don't do that." He looked up at me, eyes a little vulnerable now. "Do what?" "Act like this is just some one-sided thing. You think I jump into bed with every guy who asks if I want pasta?" That made him smile, finally. "You mean you don't?" "Nope. Only the ones with broken doors and good wine." He laughed, that low, warm laugh that had started to feel weirdly comforting. Then he went quiet again. I could tell he was still thinking, still not quite settled in the moment, like he didn't trust it to last. You don't have to explain anything, I said, my voice softer now. We don't have to define it. But for what it's worth, this doesn't feel like nothing. Daniel didn't say anything right away. Just pressed his face lightly against my shoulder and let out a breath, like he needed to hear that more than he thought. You ever stay the night? He asked, after a while. Sometimes. You want to tonight? I thought about the bed, about the quiet, about him, his warmth against me, the calm I hadn't felt all week until now. Yeah, I said. I do. We stayed like that for a long time, wrapped up in a silence that didn't feel empty, and eventually, I felt his breathing even out against my side. Slow. Deep, like he finally felt safe. I woke up the next morning to sunlight leaking through the slats in the blinds. Daniel was still asleep, curled slightly toward me, one hand resting flat against my chest. His hair was messy, his mouth slightly parted, and in that moment, he didn't look like the guy who had flirted with me over pasta. He just looked like someone I didn't want to leave. I quietly slipped out of bed and padded to the bathroom, splashing water on my face and trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. Because it wasn't just about the sex. It wasn't just some fluke. It was the way he looked at me when I first walked in. The way he listened. The way he let himself be soft. When I came back, he was sitting up in bed, eyes half open, his voice raspy. You leaving? Not yet. He reached for me, fingers brushing my wrist. Good. That was all he said, but it was enough. I stayed for breakfast. Daniel threw on a hoodie over his bare chest and padded into the kitchen while I hunted for my jeans. He made coffee like a ritual, measuring the beans, grinding them by hand, boiling the water to just the right temperature. It was quiet, intimate, like we'd done it before, even though we hadn't. You like eggs? He asked, halfway through whisking. Love 'em, but I'm not picky, he smirked. I'm learning that. We ate in the kitchen again, sunlight spilling across the counter. The vibe was different now. Less charged, more comfortable, like we'd skipped a few steps and landed in the middle of something real. After we cleaned up, I lingered near the front door, my tool bag slung over one shoulder. Daniel leaned against the frame, arms crossed. So, he said, dragging the word out, do I owe you anything? For the door? I asked. Nah, that one's on the house. He cocked an eyebrow. What about the rest of it? I grinned. That one's negotiable. Daniel stepped closer, and for a second, I thought he was going to kiss me again. But he didn't. He just stood there, inches away, looking at me like he was memorizing my face. You'll call me? He asked. I'll do you one better, I said, pulling out my phone and handing it to him. Put your number in. He did, typing slower than necessary, like he was giving himself time to think. You actually gonna use it? He asked. I'm a man of my word. He handed the phone back. Good. I turned to go, but then stopped, one hand still on the doorknob. Hey, Daniel? Yeah. That door, it wasn't just stuck. The track was warped. Could have happened from weather or just time. Is that your way of saying it was broken for a while? Yeah, but it got fixed. He smiled, small and knowing. So did I. I left after that, stepping into the early morning light, the city slowly waking around me. I didn't usually feel much after a job, but this one stuck. Later that day, I got a text from him. It was just a photo. 2 cups of coffee on his balcony table, and the words, "Next time, I'll cook dinner." I stared at it longer than I needed to. Then I replied, only if I get to stay for breakfast again. And just like that, something started. It wasn't fast, it wasn't easy, but it was real. And it all began with a stuck sliding door, a plate of pasta, and the unexpected feeling of being exactly where I needed to be.